Antisocial personality disorder and spirituality. This is Shores of Infinity with your host Chris, and this video is about the antisocial personality disorder. We already talked about borderline narcissism and codependent. Now it's time for antisocial and histrionic. Today, antisocial. So what does antisocial mean? Antisocial does not mean that you're shunning society. It's not a social phobia. Antisocial means that you have no regard for societal rules and that you also have no inhibitions to lie, cheat and steal. How does this come to pass? Of course, again, childhood trauma. Either you're taught directly or indirectly that lying and cheating is okay or necessary, or this is the only way to survive. That's usually the way. For any kind of psychological quirk, it's a survival mechanism. So also, of course, lying and cheating may be a survival mechanism. If you're punished for being truthful and honest, then you will develop the opposite. People with a very strong antisocial score of 4 or 5 will often choose some kind of criminal or half-criminal career. But of course, you find these very often in economy and politics. Like politicians are famous, amazing liars. Not all of them, of course, but not few either. And in economy, marketing is basically lying. Because you create a need for something that no one actually needs. So all these professional con artists, be it in a legal or illegal way, might have a antisocial personality disorder in one way or another, from 1 to 5. Now, what does this have to do with spirituality? There's one overlapping feature here. If you want to progress in spirituality, you need to have a certain disregard for societal rules and morals. Otherwise, you'll never get out of Spell Dynamics Blue, meaning just blindly following everything you've been told by the authorities. To follow the spiritual path, you need to be a revolutionary in some way or another. Of course, there are different ways to be that. For example, you could be a Enneagram number 1. But quite a few famous spiritual teachers had a slight antisocial personality disorder of 1. And there are ways, of course, to channel this. Antisocial doesn't necessarily mean you have to do anything harmful to others. You can become a comedian, for example. Comedians are often a little bit antisocial. That's why they see what's wrong and how they can make fun of it. Revolutionaries, of course. If you look at Lenin, for example, Lenin is the prime example of a revolutionary. Unfortunately, he was an asshole as well. But the whole idea to really put this workers' revolution into action, you need to have a certain disregard for societal rules. Sri Aurobindo did not have antisocial personality disorder, not even of 1, but he could have. He was a revolutionary before he became a guru, and not a peaceful one like Gandhi. We're all growing up in sick societies. Our whole society, our whole culture is quite sick. So you can either develop a personality disorder by belonging, wanting to belong to that culture, which is already quite antisocial, or because you want to be different. Like, how many people are cheating with taxes? Is this already antisocial or not? Many tech geniuses, millionaires and billionaires have a certain score of antisocial PD, usually 1 or 2. It's quite common, actually. Because you need this to manifest something that everyone else says is impossible or nonsense. To take risks is necessary for financial success and for creative success. It is a sort of gamble. To try the impossible against all odds, against all probabilities, and against everything most people say. People say this is impossible. Don't do it. It has never been done. Now, what we're trying to do here with enlightenment, this is impossible. It's never been done. Almost never. Very few people. But thousands and thousands, millions of people are trying to reach enlightenment for some reason. Although it's almost impossible. They know it's almost impossible. They think, okay, but yeah, let's try anyway. Or some people even exit society. They move somewhere else, become a sadhu in India or a monk in the Himalayas or wherever. They exit the normal society. They try to get by without work, without a house and address. Just drifting. And this drifting can actually be very helpful on the path. And it will prevent other things, like having a family, for example. Many artists and architects who are very famous now had a slight antisocial personality disorder. And I've met also many people on the spiritual path who had antisocial personality disorder at 1, which is not so bad yet. You can still live a normal life with this. It just means you don't listen to the mainstream. It may lead to lying and cheating, but not necessarily so. Of course, there are some gurus which are lying and cheating, and this might also be a result of that. Osho, for example, most probably had borderline and also slight antisocial personality disorder. But it made him a great philosophy teacher and a great guru because he knew to think outside of the box. And as we want to get outside of the box, outside of the matrix, it's a nice start to think outside of the box. So I'm not recommending here to be antisocial or to become antisocial. I'm just observing that many people on the spiritual path that I've met have antisocial personality disorder at 1. The most common personality disorder in spiritual seekers, of course, is codependency. But the second most common might be antisocial, but only at 1. Still, even a score of 1, you have to get rid of this personality disorder at some point. It might have been helpful initially to question authority. Timothy Leary is another example. That was actually one of his main mottos: question authority, think for yourself. But he also had stupid ideas like putting LSD into the drinking water of the city or something. That is crazy. Don't do it. He didn't do it, but he was thinking about it. But any personality disorder, and even at a score of 2 or 1, will become an obstacle at some point, because it is a fantasy. It is an artificial fantasy that you have built at some point to survive. It's a survival mechanism. It is a distortion, a deliberate distortion that has become a habit. And you have to get rid of all habits and all distortions to reach the love phase and enlightenment. No fantasy, no illusion, no delusion can be maintained. They are crutches. You cannot run with crutches. So you have to get rid of your crutches, and the way to do it is, as always, trauma therapy. There will be a video that has been requested: what to do if I cannot access or afford trauma therapy. That will be one of the next videos. So a very slight and compensated antisocial personality disorder might just be manifesting as a strong dissatisfaction with society. But if it's stronger, then it's very irresponsible and impulsive and aggressive usually. Also quite often antisocial and narcissist goes hand in hand, or antisocial and even psychopath goes hand in hand. So this is on a different level. I'm just talking here because it's about spirituality, not so much as personality disorders. A personality disorder of 1, in this case, doesn't necessarily make you a criminal. You may have the disposition for that, but if it's well compensated, you just might try to find a way out of the rat cage and willing to employ unusual means for that. If it's not compensated anymore, this might lead to lying and cheating, which unfortunately some popular speakers like Oprah Winfrey or so employ to appear spiritual somehow, which they're not. Another example I mentioned before was Teal Swan. So I'm sure these people have helped others to some degree, motivated others, but mainly they have helped themselves. And if you want to get beyond the 200s and 300s of the Hawkins scale, then you have to deal with this distortion, disorder. When we think of sociopaths, or when we read of antisocial personality disorder, we often think of people, imagine people who have it at 4 or 5. When we imagine a fast car, we imagine it driving fast. When we imagine someone with antisocial personality disorder, we imagine someone who's very, very antisocial, like a mafia kingpin, like the Godfather. And indeed, people who have any kind of personality disorder at 4 or 5, they're quite rare. But those who have it at 1 are not rare. And that's usually not in the textbooks and on Wikipedia and so on. Codependency, for example, is overall, if you count all of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's estimated at least 20% of all society in modern Western civilizations, or those who imitate them. And the same goes for narcissism and borderline and antisocial and histrionic. It's very common at a low scale of 1 or 2. It's my hobby to examine the lives of famous people of all ilks, and I found many of them who have clearly displayed traits of antisocial personality disorder, both in spirituality and in all other parts and strata of society. And most of those who have antisocial at 1 never act out. They compensate it by, playing ego shooter computer games or whatever, role-playing games, arts, and so on. It's more of a disposition, a likelihood, a possible strain in your destiny that you might act out according to it or not. And in some cases it is needed to break out of the life you were raised in. A popular example is many famous rap musicians. It helped them to get out of poverty and criminality. Only the next step is therapy. Okay, but here now is the clue and your reward for watching the video until the end and not just the first 4 minutes. People on the spiritual path who seem to have antisocial, histrionic, borderline or narcissistic disorder at this intensity level of 1, actually, most of the time, for them is just a symptom of codependency. Any child will imitate their role models, and the parents are the role models. So if you have a parent or even 2 with strong antisocial, narcissistic or borderline syndrome who are very, very dominating or even aggressive, you will have to find ways to deal with them. And one way to deal with them, especially for someone who develops codependency, is to imitate them. And thus may seem to have developed similar traits than the narcissistic father, for example, but in actual fact is just a compensation and can be gotten rid of easily once the codependency syndrome is dealt with. So it's not antisocial personality disorder at all, it's just a part of the codependency. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, liking and subscribing, and thank you for joining me as a patron, and thank you to all those who have already joined me as a patron. Thank you very much.